So, opinions, reviews on the Resident Evil 3 remake have been very mixed. And who would have thought, coming off of the remake of one of the best, most beloved games in this series, one of the most disliked games in the Resident Evil series, would fall short in many people's opinion. Yeah, going into this, I fully expected the Resident Evil 3 remake to not have as good of a reception because we were coming off the second game. The same thing happened with the original versions of these games in the 90s. Because Resident Evil 2 was so great, so loved, Resident Evil 3 just didn't live up to many people's expectations. Why wouldn't the same thing happen again? But with one of the common talking points with this remake being, is it even worthy of a $60 price tag? Pretty big step down from the previous entry just last year, right? I mean, many people hailed the Resident Evil 2 remake as their game of the year, or one of their games of the year. Seems like a pretty dramatic change. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Let's start with talking about the good stuff, the great stuff. Visuals right off the bat. These RE Engine games continue to just get better and better looking. I think when we look back, these will go down as some of the very best looking games of this generation. The characters just look so lifelike. I also do like the redesigns they chose for the characters. There's some really nice use of lighting to set up some creepy and just gorgeous looking areas. And since much of this game takes place on the streets of Raccoon City, you get some stunning cityscape environments. Of course, combined with the disgusting, decrepit sewers and that. So many cool environments for the Nemesis to come in and just utterly destroy. And let's talk about that big bastard. Nemesis is pretty much the Terminator, constantly coming for you from the opening minutes of the game until the very end, pitting you against him as you find more and more over-the-top ways to put him down, only to watch him almost immediately shrug it all off and keep coming. I think they did a great job in handling this iconic character. It's tough when you have a situation like this where you're facing the same enemy over and over again to keep making those encounters feel unique and even special, but this game manages to do that. At no point did I get sick of facing the Nemesis. And besides the Nemesis, gameplay-wise, this is pretty much the same as the Resident Evil 2 remake. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. A bit faster due to changes like the new dodge ability. You definitely want to get this skill down, especially if you're playing on the harder difficulties, which I actually recommend for this game if you're more of a veteran player, as not only are there many instances where you have to dodge big attacks, say in like boss fights, but it also makes it easier to get around and avoid enemies. With zombies, for instance, even dodging into them can result in you sort of brushing them off when they grab you and avoiding damage. May seem like a small addition to the game, but it is a game changer. So for the most part, I don't really have many negative things to say about this game. So what's the problem? Well, there are two major complaints I seem to see consistently circling with this game around the internet. One I think is justified. The other, I think is complete BS. It's stupid. Both I think are way easier to understand if you actually played the original Resident Evil 3, which it's been clear from many of the reviews and impressions I've seen from people, most did not. Let's start with the one that I think is, so dumb. The game goes too much into the action genre and leaves behind a lot of the horror. How many idiots I've had to see since this game came out. Oh, it just doesn't feel like a Resident Evil game. If you knew the original Resident Evil 3 was much of the same. It was the action movie of the original trilogy. The new dodge mechanic in this game, that's pulled directly from RE3. There were more enemies, more explosions, a greater focus on more powerful weapons like the grenade launcher. Nemesis is actually a great example. I'm sure many people who played this game and the RE2 remake think that Mr. X felt a lot scarier than Nemesis does. Hearing those footsteps in the distance as he's slowly stalking you throughout the game, you contrast that with these epic battles you have with Nemesis. He's a very imposing figure, but it doesn't really scare you as much. And that's exactly how it should be. Nemesis is Mr. X, but armed with flamethrowers and rocket launchers. He is supposed to be kind of obnoxious, extra, to the point where it's almost comical. That's what Nemesis is, and that's what sets him apart from other Resident Evil baddies. Similarly, this more action feel is what separated Resident Evil 3, for better or worse, apart from Resident Evil 1 and 2. And it's not to say the game is like all action. There are still plenty of scares and more tense moments. It's just this game did have more of that cheesy action movie vibe, even complete with the stereotypical Russian villain. and I think they only cranked all that up in this game. The main point I would make here is, I didn't buy this game to have another remake of Resident Evil 2. I bought this game to have a remake of Resident Evil 3, and that's exactly what I got. So I just can't fathom why so many people have a problem here, unless of course you're just not familiar with the game and you didn't know what you were getting into. So yeah, that complaint, I think it is utter, complete nonsense. But then there's the other big one. The game is too short. There's not enough content. This is another holdover from the original version. How Long to Beat has an average run of the original Resident Evil 3, taking about 6.5 hours, and that's pretty close actually to what I think it will take most people to play through the remake. You'll probably clock in around 5.5 hours in-game time for your first playthrough, but note, in-game time isn't going to count your reloads. Regardless, yes, the remake is short, and the original game was also short. But I don't think game length is something people are particularly nostalgic for. While I'm glad they kept the feel of the original version, I wouldn't be mad, and I don't think anyone else would be mad if they added more stuff to the remake, but rather, content was actually cut. Both this and the RE2 remake actually felt, to me, like more was cut than was added. The big difference is, though, with RE2, both now and back then, you have much more going on in terms of replay value. You have 2 different characters, as well as A and B versions of their campaigns, where in 3, you've only got the one campaign and different difficulties for it to play through. You have some of the same reasonings to replay as 2, getting the higher ranks on different difficulties, unlocking new items. There's actually this whole in-game store where you rack up these points from playing through the campaign and can use them to unlock different cosmetics, weapons, etc. to use in future playthroughs. Good stuff, but I think it's still not enough, especially to make up for the big element they cut from this game. One that I was highly anticipating and that I think would have helped greatly improve this game's sense of value. The OG Mercenaries mode. If you're unfamiliar, this was a sort of time trial mode where you could play as different characters that would start with different loadouts, and you go through this course trying to complete it in the fastest time you can. And Mercs mode obviously went on to be a staple of Resident Evil games and has been something I've been dying for since we started getting these remakes. I think it would be so much fun. Inevitably, I think we will get a Mercs mode in one of these new Resident Evil games, probably with environments and playable characters from all various entries, and it'll be amazing, but it should have been here. The place it originally started, the game that does feel lacking in terms of content, should have been the introduction of Mercs mode to these remakes. This was a major foul, in my opinion. But we did get a new mode. Yes, if we are going to talk about this game's value, we must talk about Resident Evil Resistance, the multiplayer mode that comes packed in with RE3. It's kind of similar to Mercs. You're completing a time trial, but you're teaming up with 3 other players. There are different characters to play that have different stats. You can be a healer, a brawler that uses melee weapons, a hacker, and all of you survivors are playing against the Mastermind, who is essentially a dungeon master. The Mastermind player spawns enemies and traps that they use to try to stop you and your team from getting through the course. They can also take control and play as these enemies to better execute different strategies, focus on certain players, and it does pull from both the RE2 and the RE3 remake, so you can spawn Mr. X, Birkin, etc. I actually have had a lot of fun playing this mode, especially if you have friends to play as the survivors with, because coordination is pretty key to success, as you'll be running around collecting keys and that. If all the players get separated, they're way easier to take down, so having a pre-made team, definitely voice chat, makes this a lot more fun. My only big complaint about this mode is that because you have 4 players, the Mastermind needs to be able to spawn enough stuff to make things difficult for 4 people, and the environments are still very tight, lots of narrow corridors, not a lot of room to move around, so it frequently turns into a bit of a cluster, especially when it comes time to hold the line and wait for a door to open. It sometimes becomes hard to even see what's going on with so many enemies on screen. But yeah, I do hope this is something they continue to expand on, maybe with future games adding more levels, maybe making them a bit bigger, have an even bigger variety of enemies in that. I think there is something here in terms of a multiplayer Resident Evil experience, and I do believe with this multiplayer, you could justify saying maybe you feel RE3 is worth about $40 and this is worth $20, so together the package is worth $60. I think you can do that, but let's be real. the vast majority of people aren't playing Resident Evil for the multiplayer. I'd go as far to say that not one person was sold on this game because of the resistance mode. Many people, I doubt, will even try it. So even though together the value might be there, I still think the single-player offerings in a game like this should feel like a $60 value, with this multiplayer feeling just more like a bonus, and that's simply not the case with Resident Evil 3. If this was a $30, $40 game, I'd be singing its praises, because the lack of content is really my only gripe. So either they could have charged less, make this feel more like a standalone DLC for Resident Evil 2, or if they put a bit more into the campaign, gave it more replay value, added that Mercenaries mode, like I said, then I would be down with the $60 price tag. I'm glad that what is in this game is of high quality. The content that's in here doesn't feel rushed or anything. The game just needs more of it. When the game does inevitably get discounted, I mean, with the way games are today, I wouldn't be surprised if it's going for $30 in like 2 months. Once it does get cheaper, I highly recommend people check it out. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts on the Resident Evil 3 Remake in the comments. Are you currently playing the game, and do you feel it's worthy of being a full-priced title? Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of the Resident Evil 3 Remake. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you want to keep the conversation going, hit me up on Twitter at JohnnyZakari, and join my Discord, ChiGuy and Friends. Link to both in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching.